Greetings, citizens, and welcome to Unknown. I'm Jason McClellan. Thanks for hanging out with me. Journalist and author Mike Damante recently announced that he's written a follow-up to his book, Punk Rock and UFOs, Cryptozoology Meets Anarchy. The new book is titled Punk Rock and UFOs, True Believers. Rogue Planet's Shane Hurd and I recently chatted with Mike to learn more about this upcoming UFO book. Well, Mike, I want to jump into talking about your new book because I'm really excited about it. But first, I guess we'll roll back a little bit, and I'd like to know, when did you make the decision to transition from a casual observer to someone who actively, journalistically explores the UFO topic?
Good question. So I think, one of the things I mentioned in this book is there's a commonality between people who are into this stuff and research it. And it usually starts with an experience, whether it's a sighting or something sparks that or ignites that flame in our heads. And for me, as a kid, I was really into this stuff because my mom used to get me the Time Life books. It was like a book series. Every month there was a new book. And one month would be like mysterious creatures or the UFO phenomenon. And all the unknown stuff really interested me. But my interest really didn't skyrocket until I first saw something. I saw a very familiar sighting. I saw an orb in the sky. And then ever since then, I just felt more compelled to kind of dig deeper. And after I wrote the first book is very theory driven. This one, I think it's a better, more focused version of what I was going for because there's more research involved and there's other people's inputs, including yourself. So thank you for your help.
Absolutely. Shane, did you have that Time Life series book, the book series?
As a matter of fact, yes.
I thought
Can you believe
might.
it? Yeah, pre-internet days.
Yeah, that's right.
Gateway drug, those books.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, so after the release of your first book, Mike, did you experience any kind of, I love asking people this question, people who get involved in UFO research and certainly people who release a book, because when you release a book, your friends and family clearly see that you released this book because you're posting about it on social media and stuff. So after the release of your first book, did you experience any kind of increased interest in the subject from friends and family?
More so from outsiders.
Okay.
From people who I shared mutual friends with that I eventually met. Or, for example, I would have a friend who would share something about it, and then it would kind of snowball from there. But the increased interest really came from, honestly, I'm not just saying this, it really started with the first time I was on Rogue Planet.
Okay.
That was the first podcast I ever did. You were the first one to really kind of discover me. So the interest in the book and the brand, I guess, started with you. So I'm very thankful and grateful for that.
Well, I couldn't be not be intrigued because, punk rock and UFOs are two of my favorite things in the world. So naturally, it was a perfect fit.
Yeah. So, no, I appreciate that. But it's weird, it's hard because sometimes you try to have conversations with people, even like your close friends, and they, sometimes you're kind of dismissive and sometimes family's open-minded, but it's still hard to really engage certain people. Actually, a few weeks ago, I was in Chicago. I was there with my girlfriend and her friends, and they saw something. They saw something when we were on a boat tour. I didn't see it because I was too busy playing on my phone. And, I posted about this on my blog. They actually saw an orb in the sky that split up into various other orbs. And it wasn't just them. They weren't playing a trick on me. I asked other people on the boat, and they saw it too. So that night afterwards, we kind of had the conversation, and they were asking me questions, and they were very open-minded and fascinated. And one of her friend's brother was there, and he's going to get his master's in physics. He's going to be a physicist. Mm. And he was very open-minded, and he says, absolutely, mathematically, there's other life forms and universes in the universe. Just mathematically makes sense. So it's always good to have those conversations where people are open-minded and they want to know more.
And yeah, I'm sure after the first book, those conversations happened a lot more. I love that. Shane, what about you? After you started working with MUFON as a field investigator, and people in your close circle found out about that, did more people start talking to you about UFOs?
Yeah, surprisingly, I was quite nervous about it, and I was kind of in the closet on it for quite some time. But as I, kind of presented it to people, especially from, an investigative standpoint, and they were kind of shocked to hear that there's an organized effort, and it is taken seriously. Then, it raised a few eyebrows. They, were acceptive of it, and I'm going good and strong right now, and I get a lot of support from my family.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, Mike, your new book is a follow-up to your first book, like you mentioned, and you kind of already touched on this, but I'll ask you more directly. So how does the focus of the new book differ from that of the first book?
It's more focused in general. I'm trying to think the best way to describe it. So basically, it's, it kind of plays off some of the concepts that I talked about in the first one, in terms of our process of belief, and but this one more concentrates on two main goals: why we should care about this, how do we get there, and also the commonalities between the people who research this stuff and the everyday people. So the book is basically written where it's compelling enough for people who've been interested in this stuff for years to still find something new and interesting in it. And it's also written accessible enough for people who are not familiar with the topic to read it and learn something as well. So that was the main goal of the book. And it's really, I always tell people, it's kind of a call to arms for try to get people to care, to care about this stuff, because we have a lot of barriers and a lot of factors that kind of get in the way of that. So that's the main goal of the book. And I think the name True Believers, it all kind of goes together very well.
You mentioned barriers and obstacles. You want to touch on that a little bit? What do you see as some of the barriers and obstacles that we face when trying to address this?
There's multiple ones. One of the things that I actually quoted you about is, because you do such a great job on your website of choosing articles to run and how you source those articles and how you're able to differentiate between what's hoaxes and what's not. Obviously, hoax videos and all those things are barriers as well. But yeah. I think the main thing is, we kind of live in a world where this is just not a priority for people. Right. These vast secrets of the universe. I understand people have families, they have, finances, things that take precedence. I get that. But, I mentioned that so much of us, so many of us, this is a hobby. A lot of us don't do this for a living. Yeah. So, we devote a lot of our free time, emphasis on the word free, to looking into this stuff. So I think the main barrier is getting people to care, just a little bit, just to kind of question things and just to, start looking at, history and start looking at, some puzzle pieces and try to put them together on their own and start doing some of their own research and just start reading more, more things that they never read before in terms on this subject.
Even back when I was working with Open Minds, that was a big challenge back then, just trying to dig into sources for particular stories and, try to validate the news that was being delivered or actually authenticate them as valid sources. Because even if the publication, the media outlet that was reporting the story was a respected outlet, you still have to look at where they're citing, where that information is coming from, and what to make of that. It was a big challenge back then. It's an even bigger challenge now, I think, because even if you're looking at like a Google News feed, for a site to get listed under Google News, Google has requirements of a site to regularly publish stuff, on a daily basis, and essentially have some meat to the content they're posting. It can't just be like a paragraph of reposted stuff from somewhere else. So they have some requirements, but at the same time, Not so much. So as long as people are posting to sites regularly, they can apply to be Google News sources to come up in Google News feeds and things like that. And if you look now, well, if you've looked at all over the past few years, it's just become filled with absolute garbage websites when it comes to sources for UFO news. A lot of sites that have names that sound like legitimate media outlets, but they're not. They're just absolute garbage sites that are somebody's blog trying to make money, but they're posting the most absolutely ridiculous news stories with no credibility behind them, no sources to cite from, just this most ridiculous information possible with UFOs, and that is the majority of the sites posting UFO news now. So as a journalist, when I look at UFO stories now, it's increasingly difficult to quickly, without spending a lot of time, again, our free time, diving into a lot of these sources to determine what's legit and what's complete BS.
Yeah, exactly. I think just the nature of the subject itself, you always have to kind of look at it with a skeptical eye, just because, like I said, just the nature of the topic.
Well, on that, let me ask you, because as a journalist, what's your opinion of how the media in general treats the UFO topic?
I think it's getting better. In general, one of the things I talked about in the first book was, there'd be a story, but there usually wouldn't be too much follow-up on it. Right. I think nowadays, I don't know. So it's hard because you have to understand how the media works. The media is it's ratings driven. It's click driven. So when this stuff runs in print or when it's given proper television time, that means it's obviously getting interest from people, which is a good sign. And I think it's getting more respected now, so more than ever, just because the Pentagon UFO story and how mainstream outlets are covering it seriously. They're taking it seriously. So that's a positive. It's just keeping those stories in the news cycle is really hard, just because, I worked, in the media for 7 years full time, and I understand how hard it is to get stories to stay up. Not even just for a day, for a couple of hours, If a story's not clicking well on a website, it gets moved. It gets moved, or buried, or the same thing with broadcast as well.
Yeah, that's right. And, we talked about obstacles, and I think, there are plenty of internal obstacles too. I'd love to hear your thought on this, but internal being inside the UFO research community, or the UFO community, as we call it, with just a lot of conspiracy driven stuff, a lot of infighting, things like that. But also this idea of the media, and it's on the same page as the government. The government is this big singular thing. People like to think of the media as this big singular thing, just this one thing that's controlled by some evil force that has some agenda and controls what news gets released. And as a journalist, we know that's not the case, and I like to point out many times that the editors, the people who are choosing the stories to be published, are often just young kids, who have a number quoted to meet. They're just thirsty for content, and they need more content. They don't care what it is. They're going to put it up on the site and see what works. So, what's your take on that? Do you think that, you work for many big media outlets. Do you think there's some evil overlord controlling what stories get published?
I wouldn't say there's like a big evil overlord that's trying to censor stuff. I don't think it's in that case. I think, in my experiences, the overlords were supervisors who were wanting kind of more salacious, clickbaity, celebrity-based stuff. I don't think it was a conspiracy to hide real news or bury UFO stories. I don't think that was it at all. It was just more of a vested interest in them to just kind of milk as many clicks as possible through, more tabloidy stories.
Yeah, that's certainly been my experience too. And, some of the bigger outlets I've written for, required a lot of keyword research and things to determine what stories were generating a lot of buzz at that time, because you're right, the focus is on the click. It's on the attention. It's on whatever is going to make the biggest splash. So, and certainly UFOs do that. So it's kind of counterproductive, counterintuitive to say that people are sort of blocking or rejecting UFO stories because for some reason that information can't get out.
Yeah.
Well, you're a journalist. You teach journalism, and you've now authored 2 books. Writing is clearly something you enjoy, but it seems like you focus on nonfiction. Is nonfiction writing what you prefer, or do you also enjoy writing fiction?
Okay, so really good question. So growing up, I was really into writing fiction as a kid. I used to draw my own comic books. I mean, my art was awful, but the storylines were there. And I used to write my own like horror fiction. And then when I was in high school, I discovered journalism. So that was my first love of writing something that's nonfiction.
Yeah.
And this is something that we've discussed. I've quoted you on it before, that a lot of people in our industry, especially authors, are drawn to writing fiction as well.
Yeah.
And I always question if the lines blur. And that's something I talk about. I go into detail in the book about as well, about, do we blur the lines when we decide to write fiction and nonfiction, especially on this topic? Because it comes to the point where it's hard to, one of the points I make in the book is that it comes to a point where everything kind of ties together, whether it's mythology, religion, fiction, and nonfiction. They all come from something. They're all influenced by something that possibly happened. So in a weird way, they all kind of come together. I used to be really opposed to the idea of, the lines being blurred, but I kind of get it more now. I see how just through history and time, how a lot of these crazy fictional stories that we read, whether it's through comic books, movies, pop culture, were influenced by true events.
You're also a big music fan. You're a music journalist too. So let me ask you this: Have you thought at all about your opinion, your thoughts on the possible connection or why it is that so many musicians seem to be drawn to the UFO topic?
That's a really good question. I would just think because people who are usually drawn to the arts are a little bit more open-minded, I guess. So yeah, I think that's probably the best way to answer that one.
Yeah, that's an opinion that a lot of people share. I've heard that answer many times, and I think that's probably right. All right, so name of your new book is Punk Rock and UFOs, True Believers. It's out July 31st. Where can people find it?
Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com, and also, with all digital assets like iTunes, Kindle, etc.
All right, and talk a little bit about your website, because after your first book came out, you launched a website and really have developed that into its own kind of awesome media destination. So tell us about your website.
So I decided to start the website after the book just because, the book got a good reception. I started getting a small following, and I just wanted to continue the research. And I wanted to do things different. There's plenty of sites out there that do a really good job of aggregating articles of their own content, of basically coming up with their own content. So I wanted to do something that was slightly different, and also something that I wouldn't have to work on every day just because of time constraints.
Right.
Teaching full time, it takes up a lot of the time. So I want to come up with something that was a little bit more magazine-y.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's hard to describe it. I want to do something that kind of blended the ideas of ufology, cryptozoology, and culture together. So I kind of aim to do something that was featurey, but at the same time still be able to break news when I was able to as well. So one of the things I like to do, I like to interview the researchers, the people involved in it, get their experiences, get their opinions on stuff, try to do different things like getting to know you things as well. And also just, going behind the scenes. I think one of the bigger things I was proud of is when I interviewed Ralph Blumenthal, who helped break the New York Times Pentagon UFO story. Yeah. And just to get his thoughts on kind of behind the scenes of the story. And there wasn't anything earth shattering in there, but it was just something good for readers to see how they screened that story, how they came to the conclusion that, yes, this is credible. Yes, this is newsworthy. So I try to do more serious stuff like that as well. So yeah, that's kind of the site's goal, is just be an extension of the book and the brand. And I hate saying that word brand, but yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. But yeah. I will say I do that is an element, or the element of your site that I really, really enjoy is you showcasing your strong interview chops. That's fun to see because that's something where you have tremendous skill It's where you have a lot of experience. So showcasing that on the site in the articles that you put out, it's pretty badass. I like it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
So the site is punkrockandufos.com, right?
Correct. Yeah.
All right. So aside from that, how can people contact you or follow your work?
punkrockandufos.com and at Twitter at Mike Damante. Yeah, those are probably the best ways.
Awesome. Well, Mike, I'm so excited for you. Can't wait for the book to come out. Make sure to get a copy to me soon because I'm dying to read it, man.
Awesome. I think I sent it to you, the PDF to you too.
Sweet. I'm going to dive into it, bud. Good luck with everything and keep us posted. Can't wait to hear how the book does.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's all for this episode of Unknown. This show is produced by Rogue Planet. RoguePlanet.tv is where we explore and celebrate all the strange. You can find Rogue Planet on Twitter and Instagram, and you can join in the conversation in our Facebook group. You can always email me at jason@rogueplanet.tv, find me on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter at Acentric. Thanks again to Mike for taking the time to tell us about his new book, and thank you for hanging out with me today. I'm Jason McClellan. Do me a favor, friends. Stay strange.